CEO Daddy. Chapter 1306, Excessive Requirements. Alan Wood instantly moved to Billy Williams' side and explained anxiously, "I was just joking. Why are you guys so serious? You can't let Anne hear what I just said. Otherwise, I'll be sleeping on the sofa when I get home. It's good that you know this." Dempsey Wilson did not sympathize with him at all. Alan Wood curled his lips. Claire must be gentle, considerate and obedient, right? Dempsey Wilson glared at him with a dangerous gaze. "What does this have to do with you? I just want to ask, how can I get my wife to have this kind of virtue? Anne's temper is getting bigger and bigger, and I can't control her any longer. They're both mother of children. Why is there such a huge difference?" Alan Wood sighed helplessly. "That's because you hurt Anne's heart. Wasn't she also gentle and cute in the past? It's not that Anne has a big temper. She's just becoming more sensitive." Billy William reminded him on the side with good intentions. "I know, it's all my fault. I caused it. However, her forceful look is actually quite cute." Alan Wood immediately smiled like an idiot. Billy William and Dempsey Wilson looked at each other, feeling that the man beside them was becoming more and more miserable, feeling that there was nothing they could do to save him. The three friends walked out of the hall, talking and laughing to each other. At the entrance of the hall, they got on their own cars and split up. Larissa Reed crossed her arms in front of her chest and gracefully walked out of the banquet hall. Beside her, there were many men who took the initiative to strike up a conversation with her, and she did not even give them a glance as she was proud and cold. Maybe men were truly despicable. Larissa Reed's coldness actually fit well with those men. The more she liked to ignore them, the more interested they became in her. They even intentionally ride in the same elevator as Larissa Reed and tried to get close to her. "Sorry, I already have someone I love." Larissa Reed's casual words made all the men in the elevator silent. As Larissa Reed stepped out of the elevator, she let out a cold laugh from the bottom of her heart. These men were too vulgar. And it was still Dempsey Wilson who is elegant and noble. John Wilson's recent inaction made old President unhappy and he was once again called him over to reprimand him. John Wilson shamelessly stood in front of old President with his head lowered, a complicated expression on his face. "John Wilson, I'll give you one more deadline. Within 1 month, if you still don't shock Dempsey Wilson, our cooperation will be officially canceled." The old president had already lost his patience. There were only 3 months left until the spring selection, and he did not have much time to wait. He could only use such harsh methods to force these people who were working for him to do so. John Wilson was also extremely negative recently. And even though he had suffered a setback, he had not thought that he would fail so badly. He didn't know if it was because the beauty he had chosen wasn't beautiful enough, or it was because Dempsey Wilson was extremely loyal to his feelings, causing him to be helpless. "Mr. President, please be at ease. I am also prepared to make my final plan." John Wilson lifted his head and said each word. "Final plan? What was your final plan? Kill Dempsey Wilson?" Old President sneered. "To be able to kill him is of course the best thing. Unfortunately, Dempsey Wilson has a strict defense, so if I really want to kill him, I must do so on my first try. Otherwise, if I give him a chance to counterattack, and I will die horribly." John Wilson knew that there were some things that did not have a second chance. A life or death gamble really required a lot of courage. "Do you know this is the stupidest way?" Just like how a trash would advise me to find a chance to assassinate Joseph Grant, but right now, it is equivalent to causing me a great deal of trouble. Joseph Grant did not die, but I was trembling with fear every single day, afraid that he would gather any evidence. Old President scolded angrily, because he was already feeling anxious. You're right, Mr. President. We still have to make room for ourselves. Killing people is not the best way. However, I've thought of a way. John Wilson's eyes flashed like a poisonous snake. All right, I don't care what method you use. Within a month, you must bring chaos to Wilson family. The cold request of the old president came from behind. Dempsey Wilson had already funded the military equipment of the country, and this achievement directly went to Joseph Grant, because there were already people who had leaked the news, causing the citizens of the country to actively discuss about this matter. Everyone felt that Dempsey Wilson was a very positive entrepreneur, that his philanthropic work had blossomed up, and now that he was donating money to the production of military power in the country, his position would definitely become higher and higher, and if he and Joseph Grant could reach a consensus in the future, the number of Joseph Grant's supporters would even increase. John Wilson left gloomily. He clenched his fists tightly. The feeling of being reprimanded like a dog really wasn't good. John Wilson believed that the humiliation he had to endure was just to gain more glory in the future. He clenched his teeth and endured it. Dempsey Wilson was already on his guard. He had originally wanted to get the two children from Wilson family, but now it seemed that he had no way to do so. In that case, the only thing he could do was to focus on the share of 30% owned by the old man. John Wilson knew that the old man's health had improved quite a bit recently. He wanted to invite him out to relax and also use a strong method to get the share in his hands. This move of threatening his father could put him in great danger, because there was only one ending for him to do so. He had to cut off all relations with the Wilson family and become an unfilial descendant. As matters stood, he had nowhere else to go. No matter how dangerous this move was, he would still gamble. Therefore, John Wilson called the old man, first expressing his sincerity and filial piety, then inviting the old man out for lunch. The old man hadn't seen his youngest son in a while, so he obviously wanted to come over and have a meal with him when he heard that he had taken the initiative to invite him. Thus, the old man sent a driver to escort him out. When the old man went out, he had a brief conversation with the old lady. The old lady originally wanted to follow him here, but was advised by the old man. He wanted to use his identity as a father to talk to his son about his recent actions. It seemed like he went astray from the way he went 5 years ago. John Wilson was so nervous that he broke out in cold sweat. He clenched his fists at the entrance of the villa, then relaxed. He was actually very uneasy. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the old man walk out of the car by himself. Driver took the wheelchair out for the old man. Although the old man could walk, he relied more on the wheelchair. "Dad, this manor's scenery is pretty good. Let me take you for a walk." John Wilson walked over and said with a smile, "All right." The old man nodded and didn't refuse. Driver originally wanted to follow, but the old man raised his hand to stop him. John Wilson's gaze swept across his father's face, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding arose in John Wilson's heart. The father and son walked along the garden path. The snow around them had yet to melt. The scenery was still vast and white, but actually wasn't that great. Dad, why didn't you call Mom over? John Wilson asked tentatively. Let's not call her. Other than nagging, she has nothing else to say. The old man sighed softly. Dad, how have you been recently? John Wilson asked in concern. Not much. The colder the weather, the more painful it is for my legs. Sometimes, the pain makes me want to die earlier. The old man spoke the truth. Death isn't a bad thing. At least one could feel relieved, John Wilson said self-deprecatingly. What is it? Today, it's just the two of us, father and son. Just say whatever you want to say. The old man could hear the hidden meaning behind his words. Dad, I want 20% of the shares in your hands. John Wilson immediately asked for it. The old man wasn't surprised. He only chuckled twice. You finally said that. What about it, Dad? John Wilson's face turned ugly. What would you do if I didn't agree? The old man suddenly stopped his wheelchair and stood up. He turned his head and stared at his son with dignity. You've written your will, haven't you? John Wilson's face was filled with anger. Chapter 1307, Like a Nightmare. Even though the old man was old, his eyes were still sharp. He understood his youngest son's ambition, and even after sending him to jail for 5 years, he still had not awakened from his desire for power. Did he become more objectionable by the day? John Wilson's face was ashen. His eyes were filled with anger and disappointment. The money is mine. I earned it myself. I have the authority to distribute them. Do I still need your permission? The old man was stung by his son's sharp gaze, and his voice turned cold all of a sudden. I am your son. Shouldn't you share it with me? Or, in your eyes, am I no longer qualified to be your son? John Wilson was so angry that his eyes turned red, and his two fists were tightly clenched. The old man looked at him calmly, as if he was looking at the pitiful kittens and puppies by the side of the road. He wanted to use a merciful expression to persuade them, but there were some people who were not born to be merciful. John, of course you're my son. I watched you walk step by step up to today. And I feel that your greatest failure isn't to let me down, but rather than that you've never clearly understood your own position, that all you ask for is power. Those cold things. I don't know why you're so stubborn. Don't you know that only family could give you warmth? The old man suddenly clutched at his chest and began to pant heavily, as if he couldn't catch a breath at all. He began to cough so hard that his face had turned purple. John Wilson stood at the side and looked at his father with cold eyes. Seeing that he was coughing so heavily, he was not moved at all, but the anger on his face only grew more and more intense. The old man was actually testing him. He wanted to know whether or not his life was still of value in the eyes of his son. Unfortunately, what he saw was only indifference. So it turned out that he didn't have much sincerity in inviting him over for lunch today. You gave your shares to the brothers? Hey, in your eyes, they should be your family, but I am not even an outsider. The more John Wilson thought about it, the more sorrowful he felt, and the more resentful he became. I'm well aware that since you've already seen through it, then have you made your decision? The old man sat back in his wheelchair with a slight tremble, calmly waiting for the result. John Wilson suddenly rushed over, both of his hands tightly grabbing onto the two armrests of his wheelchair. His eyes red as he stared at him. Give me the shares. Give me the thing that belongs to me. If not, I will let them die. The old man was truly frightened by his actions. It was unknown if his elderly face was sorrowful or laughable. Aren't you going to think about your son? Since Jack is still so young, his future should be bright. The old man asked him painfully. Isn't my son the most useless person in your eyes? It's equivalent to being trash. Do you still care about him? John Wilson ridiculed himself. No, Jack is a very good child. His nature is not bad, but he does not have a good father to guide him. The old man corrected him in a low voice. What you mean is, I am not fit to be a son, much less be a father. In your eyes, everything I do is wrong. If that's the case, then let me continue my mistake. Since you have come here today, don't even think about leaving. I will make Dempsey Wilson take a 30% share in the deal. Take a look. Does your proud grandson really love you that much? Or does he really care about the money in his hands? John Wilson finally spoke out his shameless motives. He felt that this was a very good opportunity. The time to test his humanity had come. Didn't Dempsey Wilson view his wealth as nothing? Then, let's see which was the most important between the old man who didn't have much time and the 30% he held. Your shamelessness is invincible. The old man seemed to have guessed at this outcome, but he hadn't thought that he would truly treat him like this. His heartache was already indescribable. Didn't you say that for power? I don't even care about my pride. You really know me, as expected of my father. After John Wilson finished speaking, he suddenly gestured to the two people not far from him. The two men immediately walked over with quick steps. John Wilson said with a cold expression, "Bring a rope over here, tie him up." The old man's heart was extremely cold. However, he didn't resist, because his body wouldn't allow it, and he wasn't willing to resist either. He wanted to see what other tricks his son would play. "Mr. Wilson, is he your father?" One of the young men was a little timid and didn't dare to tie him up. John Wilson laughed coldly. "So what?" In his eyes, I am no longer qualified to be his son. Tie him up and don't let him die so easily. John Wilson, do you know what you are doing? If you tie me up, you won't be able to turn back. The old man wasn't worried about his life at the moment, but about dragging his son back from hell. John Wilson laughed sorrowfully. Can't you tell? I don't want to turn back anymore. If I am to suffer in my life, I might as well end this once and for all. You evil son. The old man was so angry that he almost fainted. Enough nonsense. Let's just watch whether or not Dempsey Wilson is willing to save you. If he doesn't come, you will only live in pain. John Wilson became determined. He had long ago stepped on his morals. The old man had nothing to say. He only had one thing that he was unwilling to say to his son, who had made him extremely disappointed. He would not let his grandson Dempsey Wilson make a choice, for he had already made a decision. In the end, John Wilson still tied up his old father and let them take him away first. John Wilson did not delay any further. After settling the old man down, he immediately called Dempsey Wilson. Dempsey Wilson was in a meeting, and under the strict atmosphere, his assistant Larry quickly walked over and whispered into his ear, "Young master, it's John Wilson. He said he has something important to talk to you about. Didn't you tell him I was busy?" Dempsey Wilson frowned, his expression impatient. After he knew that John Wilson was helping the old president, he didn't even want to talk to him anymore. "He will regret not answering your phone." Larry did not ask about the specific details of the battle just now, so he could only pass on John Wilson's threatening words. Dempsey Wilson let out a sneer, but He wanted to hear, what could John Wilson do to make him regret? Within the large meeting room, over 30 people were looking at the tall figure that had just stood up, not daring to even breathe. Larry also followed Dempsey Wilson out. Dempsey Wilson stood in the hallway and pressed his phone to his ear. He asked coldly, "What's the matter?" John Wilson patiently waited for him to come over and ask about it. At this moment, he smiled coldly. "Dempsey Wilson, I'll give you half a day to prepare. Give me 30% of your shares in exchange for the old man's life." "What did you say?" Dempsey Wilson's expression changed drastically, and his tone of voice raised. "John Wilson, you bastard, what did you do to grandfather?" "Dempsey Wilson, in terms of acting, I am still not as good as you. For example, pretending to be a filial child. No matter how I pretend, I don't look like one. No wonder the old man always feels that I am an ungrateful person." John Wilson was full of spirit now. He started to use words to stab Dempsey Wilson. He had a feeling of exultation. "Grandfather's health condition is not good. Don't joke with me." Dempsey Wilson truly did not dare believe that John Wilson would actually use his grandfather's life to threaten him. This was simply exterminating all humanity within him. "Dempsey Wilson, if you really care about your grandfather's life, prepare to transfer 30% of the shares to me right now. If not, you can just wait to see his corpse." After John Wilson finished speaking, he directly hung up the phone. His voice was extremely cold. Dempsey Wilson's finger tenaciously held onto his phone. When he heard the other party's voice, his tall and strong body clearly swayed, and almost lost his balance. Seeing that, Larry quickly stepped forward to pay attention. "Young master, are you all right? What happened?" Dempsey Wilson clenched his teeth tightly, and said with hatred, "John Wilson took away my grandfather, yet he actually used his life to threaten me to hand over 30% of the shares." Larry was so frightened that his face turned green. This was simply an act of annihilation, and there was actually someone who could do it, which it was simply outrageous. "Young master, what do we do?" Larry looked at young master's pale face and knew how serious the situation was. Chapter 1308. Parentage. Larry was asking Dempsey Wilson what to do next. Dempsey Wilson's mind was completely blank. He really did not expect that human nature could be so vile, to such an extent, that John Wilson had already lost even his most basic of humanity. Abduction of his own father and using his life and death as a wager. Was there really such a terrifying son in this world? It was obvious that after living for so long, you could see everything. "Pull out a phone for me and call Joseph Grant. I need his help." Dempsey Wilson's mind had been blank. No matter how shrewd a man was, he would still be caught unprepared when faced with such a ridiculous threat. Larry was calm, and he quickly took out his phone and used an encrypted program to call Joseph Grant. The phone rang twice, and Joseph Grant's calm and powerful voice came out. "Dempsey, what's wrong?" Dempsey Wilson had already recovered from the extreme shock, and his voice was clearly filled with grief and indignation. "John Wilson kidnapped my grandfather, and now he wants me to use my own shares to exchange. I need to quickly find out how my grandfather is doing right now. The people at your side have been following the movements of Old President's group the entire time. Do you know where John Wilson is?" Is there such a thing? Sure enough, Joseph Grant was also shocked. He just called me, and he's not joking. I'm here to draw up a contract. Help me find John Wilson quickly, and check on my grandfather's condition. He's old, and his health condition isn't too good. I'm worried that something might happen to him. The reason why Dempsey Wilson requested for Joseph Grant's help was because Joseph Grant had long ago sent people to monitor John Wilson. At this moment, his inside information had the ability to help him the most. Don't be anxious. I'll have the lieutenant to ask John Wilson's whereabouts right now. Joseph Grant consoled him with a low voice. Thank you. After Dempsey Wilson hung up, he turned and looked at Larry, who was equally anxious, and said, "Prepare the share transfer agreement. I need to find John Wilson for a talk." "Young master, I'm worried that this is a trap. Maybe the person John Wilson wants to hurt isn't the old man but you." Larry could still be considered relatively clear-headed, but seeing that Dempsey Wilson had instantly decided to go see John Wilson, he was truly afraid that something even more terrifying would happen. "I don't care about that much anymore. My grandfather's health is not good. You know, he takes medicine every day. If John Wilson jails him, he won't be able to hold on for long in such a cold day." Dempsey Wilson's face was ashen as he made his decision. "All right, I'll do it right away." Although Larry was worried, it was still related to the life and death of the Wilson family's old man. How much Dempsey Wilson respected his grandfather, he had seen it in his eyes. Dempsey Wilson's chest was stuffy to the point that it felt uncomfortable. He had the impulse to take a knife and mince John Wilson's body into 1,000 pieces. "Damn it, bastard." Dempsey Wilson muttered an incantation as he clenched his big hand into a fist and smashed it onto the wall fiercely. His 5 fingers were bleeding, and only this kind of pain could make his mood better and clear his mind. After a few seconds of silence, Dempsey Wilson took out his phone and called his brother, Joshua Wilson. As a brother, Dempsey Wilson still needed to discuss this important matter with him. Moreover, he must remind his brother to be careful of John Wilson's persecution. "Josh, is it convenient for me to tell you something?" Once the call connected, Dempsey Wilson said sadly, "Brother, did something happen?" Joshua Wilson had never heard such an uneasy voice before, so his mind instantly tensed up. "Grandfather is in trouble. John Wilson kidnapped him. You have to be careful of your safety." "Okay," Dempsey Wilson tried to warn him with a steady voice. "What is this old bastard crazy?" Joshua Wilson was shocked, and instantly cursed. "Maybe he just used Grandpa to cause trouble for me. Don't worry, I will handle this matter. He wants me to exchange the shares with Grandpa. I have already told Larry to prepare the contract. I just want to make sure that Grandpa is safe," Dempsey Wilson said in a low voice. "Brother, where are you guys going to trade? I want to go with you." Joshua Wilson immediately said anxiously, "No need, you don't need to go. You just have to take care of your own safety. This is too dangerous." Dempsey Wilson immediately advised him, "If you want me to be careful, what about you? If you still regard me as your younger brother, then you should not have to bear this danger alone. I am not as scared of death as you think," Joshua Wilson said as he reached for his coat and car key. "Josh, I treat you as my closest brother, so I won't let you take the risk. If you trust me, you should listen to me," Dempsey Wilson said gently and hung up. Brother, damn it." When Joshua Wilson heard that the call had ended, his face immediately turned green and white with anxiety. as he rushed towards the elevator without any regard for his image. When Joshua Wilson drove his sports car to the first floor of the main hall of the King building, he quickly ran to the elevator. He watched the numbers slowly slide down and was about to go crazy from anxiety. Finally, the elevator door opened. Joshua Wilson fiercely pressed on the keys with his fingers, begging for it to open faster. However, that was how things went in this world. The more anxious you became, the longer time passed. When Joshua Wilson rushed to the first floor of Dempsey Wilson's office, he did not find his brother anywhere. He immediately went to the assistant's room and asked anxiously, "Where's my brother? Who knows where he went?" A few of the assistants in the office were shocked by the sudden intrusion of this superstar. Joshua Wilson immediately pulled up the sleeves of one of the male assistants. "Tell me, where did my brother go?" "Second young master, just now, I only saw Mr. Wilson and his assistant leaving in a hurry. As for where did they go, I really don't know." The male assistant was so scared that she looked nervous. Joshua Wilson had no choice but to let go of his clothes and turn to run out. While running, he took out his phone to call Dempsey Wilson, but no one answered the phone. He knew his brother did not want him to be involved in this matter, but the more he did not know, the more uneasy he became. Joshua Wilson walked out of the hall with his blank eyes and mind. Dempsey Wilson brought his assistant Larry and had already left the company in the car. Listening to the phone ringing again and again, Larry wanted to say something but stopped himself. "The second young master is calling again," Larry reminded softly. "Don't answer it. Let it ring." Dempsey Wilson reached out and pinched the center of his brows. He left the company on purpose because he was afraid that his brother would come looking for him. At this moment, he was anxiously waiting for news from Joseph Grant. He had to know how grandfather's situation was before he could go see John Wilson. Finally, Joseph Grant called him. Larry's mind shook and he quickly handed the phone over to Dempsey Wilson. "There might be news for Mr. Vice President." "Hey!" Dempsey Wilson instantly moved closer to his ear and asked urgently, "Where's my grandfather? Do you know?" Joseph Grant's voice transmitted over, but it was a little guilty. "Dempsey, my informants only know that John Wilson kidnapped your grandfather, but they do not know where your grandfather is currently. I have already asked him to help look for him, but it's best if you do not have too much hope." Dempsey Wilson was completely intense. He was nervous and his voice was a little hoarse. "I got it. Thank you. I'll trouble your people to help me continue looking for it. Are you prepared to contact John Wilson now? Where are we going to trade? Can you choose this location?" Joseph Grant was also very worried about the safety of his good friend. He knew that John Wilson's extreme behavior must be related to the old president. "Yes, I can only go see him. I must rescue my grandfather first. He is in bad health." Dempsey Wilson made the final decision. He wanted to contact John Wilson. "After the trade location is confirmed, let me know. I'm worried that John Wilson's target is you, so I'm going to send people to protect you in the dark," Joseph Grant said nervously. "All right, let's talk later." Dempsey Wilson was also very grateful for his good friend's help. After hanging up Joseph Grant's phone, Dempsey Wilson called John Wilson, preparing to meet up with him for a trade. After John Wilson received the phone call, he looked extremely pleased. "Are you prepared for the contract? Before we make the deal, I must see my grandpa. I want to know if he's well or not." Dempsey Wilson made a request. Of course, John Wilson was rather straightforward. Chapter 1309. He regretted. John Wilson had only given Dempsey Wilson half a day. He thought that Dempsey Wilson would delay a lot. But what he did not expect was that Dempsey Wilson actually called him within half a day to agree on a trade location. After hanging up the phone, he was startled for a while, then laughed coldly. John Wilson had prepared for this transaction for a long time. He was afraid that someone would put spies around him, so this time, all he was looking for were new faces. A group of foreigners that he had worked with abroad before. When John Wilson heard Dempsey Wilson request to see the old man, he immediately called for someone to transmit a video. In the video, the old man's hands and feet were no longer bound. He was free, but he could go nowhere. He could only sit on his wheelchair with an abnormally calm expression. John Wilson immediately told the old man through the video, "Dad, don't you have anything you want to say to your good grandson?" The old man only raised his eyes, but didn't say anything. "Maybe you did not see the wrong person. Dempsey Wilson really does value your life. He has now agreed to make a deal with me. As long as I get 30% of the shares, I will have the chance to enter the company's board. At that time, I will have the highest authority. It's useless even if you hate me. I will directly kick your grandson out. I want you to see, my things are not things that anyone can take away from me." John Wilson was so infuriated that nobody knew why, but he roared wildly at the video. "People like you are unable to hold on to your wealth. Don't get cocky." The old man finally spoke, but from the sound of his voice, he seemed exceedingly weak. His face was pale. His palpitation was becoming more severe because he hadn't taken any medicine. "Is that so? Then you better live to be 100 years old, because I want to let you see how I climb up step by step. I am more capable of choosing sides than Dempsey Wilson, so I will definitely succeed." When John Wilson heard how his own father underestimated his ability, his face turned green. "All right, I'll wait and see." The old man smiled. John Wilson suddenly felt anxious. He no longer chatted with the old man and directly transferred the recording to Dempsey Wilson. Seeing his grandfather's pale face, Dempsey Wilson was so angry that he was about to go mad. He roared at his phone, "John Wilson, grandfather has some medicine in his pocket. Hurry and make him consume it. Do you hear me?" John Wilson laughed mockingly. "Dempsey Wilson, stop pretending in front of me. Your act is meaningless. You fawned over my dad. Isn't it because you want to obtain the shares in his hands? You bastard." Dempsey Wilson was so angry that his entire body went cold. He never thought that there would actually be someone so cold-blooded that he could use his own biological father as a bargaining chip. "There's a lake in the northern suburbs 50 kilometers away, and there's a resort by the lake. I'll be waiting for you there, and I'll allow you to bring a person here. Oh right, don't forget to bring over important documents. Since you know your grandfather's health is not good and he needs to eat medicine, you shouldn't waste each other's time." John Wilson was afraid that Dempsey Wilson would play some tricks too, so he reminded him not to forget to take the contract. Dempsey Wilson immediately hung up. He first called Joseph Grant, and then said to his assistant Larry, "Are you willing to come with me to save my grandfather?" "Young master, I am willing. It might be dangerous, or it might even lose its life," Dempsey Wilson reminded him once again. "Young master, you don't have any followers who are afraid of death." Larry smiled. Dempsey Wilson patted his shoulder gratefully. Joseph Grant quickly called back. His voice was calm as he said, "Dempsey, Your luck isn't bad. About 10 kilometers away from that resort, there is a reserve army. Really? Thank you so much. After Dempsey Wilson heard this, the tensed-up expression on his face loosened for a moment. I'll arrange an ambush for them first. You must be careful. John Wilson isn't even afraid of death this time. I really don't know how crazy he can get. Joseph Grant was extremely worried for his friend's safety, and reminded him once again, I will be careful. Thank you. With that said, Dempsey Wilson extended his hand out from a hidden cabinet beneath him and took out 2 handguns. He handed one of the handguns over to Larry, act on seeing an opportunity. Larry played with a handgun, and chuckled. I haven't played with it in a while. I'm afraid that I may be rusty. If the world is at peace and the hearts of men are kind, who would be willing to pick it up? Dempsey Wilson laughed helplessly. Dempsey Wilson told the driver and his bodyguards to quickly drive towards the destination that John Wilson had set for them. Dempsey Wilson brought 8 bodyguards and 4 cars with him, but John Wilson had requested for him to bring only 1 person, so his bodyguards would definitely not follow him, but he had reminded them to be ready to support him at any time. In an hour, Dempsey Wilson's convoy had reached the resort. At this moment, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there were no customers at all, only couples walking in and out. Seeing that many luxury cars suddenly appeared, they all looked over in shock. Dempsey Wilson quickly got off the carriage, and Larry followed him with a briefcase in his hand. All the important documents were inside. Just as Dempsey Wilson got off the car, his phone rang. It was John Wilson. You came quite quickly. Go to the left side of the road and walk to the end. Go to the 2nd floor. I'll wait here for you. John Wilson arranged the route that he should take on the phone, and his voice sounded extremely pleased and excited. When he thought that he was about to become the biggest shareholder of the Wilson Group, how could John Wilson not be excited? He even thought about dismissing Dempsey Wilson from his position on the first day he joined the board of directors, and how he would need to purge the company once to kick out all of Dempsey Wilson's loyal subordinates. It was as if he was dreaming of the moment when he was above 10,000 people in the company. That was definitely the pinnacle of his life. Dempsey Wilson and Larry exchanged glances, and then he felt that the phone in his pocket rang 3 times, which was his and Joseph Grant's signal. At the moment, the phone was ringing, indicating that Joseph Grant's men had arrived and lurked around the place. Dempsey Wilson calmed down a little and quickly walked toward the direction of John Wilson. John Wilson sat in a guest room on the 2nd floor as his fingers lightly rapped the table. Using his last bit of patience, he waited for his fate to change. The moment Dempsey Wilson stepped into the hall on the 1st floor, he saw a few foreigners standing up nervously from the sofa, looking at him and Larry with hostile expressions. Dempsey Wilson let out a cold laugh in the bottom of his heart. It seemed that John Wilson had already made sufficient preparations for today, which meant that he wasn't forced to have no other choice but to kidnap his grandfather, and had instead always thought of kidnapping him as a plan of his. He was even more furious now, and he was truly regretful that he didn't send him to jail at the time. But it was too late to say that he regretted it now. Dempsey Wilson blamed himself for his mistakes. If he was not afraid of grandfather and grandmother knowing the true cause of his father's death, John Wilson would have already been investigated. John Wilson had already become crazy to this extent. Dempsey Wilson had not even walked up the stairs when he heard the sounds of applause. as if they were already impatient to celebrate his success. Dempsey Wilson stared coldly at the smiling John Wilson. I want to see my grandfather. Otherwise, you still wouldn't get anything. Don't worry. The old man is in high spirits. As long as you sign. I said it already. I need to see grandfather safely appear in front of me right now. Otherwise, even if I die, you won't be able to receive even the slightest bit of Wilson family's money. Dempsey Wilson would not easily agree to his conditions. You're so difficult to deal with. John Wilson's face immediately darkened. After that, he made a hand gesture, and the room to the side opened, and a foreign man pushed the old man out. The old man was wearing a thick layer of cotton clothing, and looked like he was taken care of properly. Grandpa, when Dempsey Wilson saw him, his eyes immediately reddened. Chapter 1310, No Winner. The old man looked at his most proud grandson and revealed a gratified smile. Seeing that Dempsey Wilson's eyes had turned red, he immediately raised his hand. Men should never cry. Dempsey Wilson instantly held back his tears. He cried because he felt sorry for himself, but his grandfather's words caused him to become stubborn all of a sudden. We don't have time to reminisce about the old days. Everyone is very busy. Hurry up and do what you have to do. No matter how much you grandfather and grandson want to feel touched, I won't interfere. John Wilson stood at the side, and hated the old man to the extreme in his heart. He hated the way the old man looked at Dempsey Wilson, with a gaze filled with admiration and love. But why the old man looked at him indifferently? Was he a son that he had picked up? Pick up? John Wilson's mind started to buzz. Why was it only now that he realized he was retrieved by the old man? Was he not his own son? John Wilson suddenly wanted to take a look at his own face and see how much he looked similar to the old man. The thought was funny, but John Wilson suddenly doubted their relationship. Grandfather, are you all right? Dempsey Wilson asked hoarsely. Dempsey, you shouldn't have come. He has already lost his humanity. Even if you were to transfer the shares of the company to him, he would not let you off. The old man suddenly spoke out, but what he said made John Wilson's scalp go numb, and he suddenly turned around with a sinister expression. Shut up, John Wilson roared. Dempsey Wilson knew that his grandfather was worried about him, but he was even more worried about his grandfather's safety. John, can you now tell me how you caused your brother's death? Seeing John Wilson's excited expression, the old man added another stab to John Wilson's angry face. Everyone present was shocked, except for the two foreign men who looked as if they didn't understand what was going on. What nonsense are you spouting? John Wilson pointed at the old man's face, his fingers and voice trembling. Dempsey, I told you that you must investigate the cause of your father's death. Did you seriously investigate it? The old man looked warmly at his grandson. I did. Dempsey Wilson's voice was tight as well, as he glared hatefully at the pale-faced John Wilson. Then why didn't you tell me? You must have evidence in your hands. The old man's tone was full of reproach and a sigh. Grandfather, Dempsey Wilson's voice was inexplicably dry, and he did not know how to explain it, because right now, his heart was also in a mess. He had always been afraid of his grandparents knowing, but now, hearing the meaning behind his grandfather's words, did his grandfather know anything? John Wilson covered his head, as though he was suffering from a headache. With both of his eyes, he stared at the old man. What do you know? How could you possibly know? If you want people to not know, then don't do it. You think that hiding things from the world is impossible, but you forgot. I'm your father, and everything you do or say cannot escape my eyes. The reason I let you stay in prison for 5 years is also to make you regret your actions. The old man stared at John Wilson intently. His words were extremely sharp, like a blade cut into John Wilson's heart, causing him to be drenched in blood. So that's how it is. You want me to go to jail. It's not because I drugged his wine. You are trying to avenge my big brother. You are actually plotting against me. You are actually plotting against me. John Wilson finally realized that he was like a clown who became a huge joke in his father's eyes. However, he still thought that he had fooled everyone because he thought that he was too smart. John, with things as it is, are you still not going to reflect? Everything in the Wilson family belongs to the Dempsey brothers. Since you owe their father your life, you no longer have the qualifications to compete with them for anything. The old man mocked him. Why am I not qualified? Big brother deserved to die. He's been like a philanthropist, helping me with this and helping me with that every day, but he's never given me any more. Even if I had more to fill my vanity, I wouldn't have wanted to take his life. He's just too stingy. You parents are too biased, even though I'm smarter than him, but you just don't love me. John Wilson seemed to have gone mad. His state was berserk. No one knew if it was tears of regret or anger in his eyes. He looked like a madman, but also like a fool. Dempsey Wilson looked at him with hatred, and suddenly felt that he was extremely pitiful. Maybe dying was not even a relief to him, but living should be. Old man, shut up. I don't want to hear any of your words. Dempsey Wilson, hurry up and sign the contract. John Wilson did not want to continue talking to them. His will was already at the edge of collapsing. He had to finish all the important things before he could be at ease. Dempsey, I know that you're doing the right thing to help me, hiding the truth from me and Grandma. Your grandma's endurance isn't good. If she knew it, she'd definitely be angry to the point where she'd be depressed for the rest of her life. But the old man did not stop. He looked at Dempsey Wilson benevolently and continued speaking. I told you to shut up. Did you hear me? John Wilson was already roaring. Dempsey Wilson sorrowfully blamed himself as he looked at his grandfather. He had been hiding this from him for a long time. It turned out that his grandfather had always been a person who knew about it. Grandfather, I'll bring you home, Dempsey Wilson said, then gestured to Larry. Take out the documents. Larry didn't hesitate at all and quickly reached for the zipper on his briefcase, intending to get the documents. John Wilson stared at the briefcase greedily throughout, wishing that he could help himself. John, I believe that it won't be long before you personally say a word of apology to your brother. The old man let out a soft sigh. If you want to speak again, I'll have someone cover your mouth. John Wilson was already scared to death, so he did not dare to listen to too many words. He kept reminding himself that he was a big scoundrel who had lost his humanity, and that in order to achieve his goal, he could not acknowledge anyone of his family. The old man let out a cry, and suddenly, his hand hidden in the loose cotton clothes seemed to move a bit. Immediately afterwards, the old man let out a low growl that could not be endured. Grandpa Dempsey Wilson suddenly turned his head to look. The old man had just pushed away his cotton clothes, revealing the clothes he was wearing underneath. The white suit was stained with red blood. A military knife stabbed deeply into his chest, causing blood to gush out. Dempsey Wilson was stunned. All the blood in his body seemed to freeze. Even his breathing had stopped, and the pain in his heart was indescribable. John Wilson's eyes were also rigidly opened as a look of disbelief emerged on his face. Grandpa Dempsey Wilson cried out in pain as his large body quickly pounced towards the old man. "Kill him! Kill him!" John Wilson immediately shouted to the few foreigners beside him in English. Before his voice could be heard, Larry, who had opened his briefcase, took action first. He did not take out a contract, but a handgun, and quickly knocked out the two foreigners beside the old man. In the next second, he pointed his gun at John Wilson's head and said coldly, "Don't move, John Wilson. Look at what you've done." "Grandfather, hold on. I'll take you to the hospital." Dempsey Wilson's heart ached to the extreme. His entire body went ice cold, and even his voice became difficult. He wanted to pick his grandfather up, but the old man held down his hand. "There's no need to trouble yourself, Dempsey. It's useless. Just do whatever you want, Grandpa. I will not make things difficult for you." The old man mumbled in pain, as if he had used up all his strength. John Wilson's entire body froze. His eyes stared straight at the old man who had lost all his strength, laughed in pain, then laughed out loud, and laughed till tears fell. "It's just a joke, Dad. Why would you take it seriously? I told you to live for 100 years, and you actually died in my hands. Since you're dead, then you all have to die. I will have them come up right now, and none of you will be able to escape." John Wilson's eyes were empty, numb, to the point that he could even see through life and death. Grandfather Dempsey Wilson's heart ached as he watched his grandfather take in his last breath. How could he still listen to John Wilson's threats?